Coming up on today's show.
And it's all about overcoming perfectionism so you can do more of what you love.
She would want to have the house all cleaned up, picked up, and looking perfect. So when the organizer would walk in, it's like, well, why did you even call me? Do you run into any of that?
So once that's done, then typically the next step is to create a plan.
Overcoming perfectionism in organizing. Today on Keeping You Organized. Well, hello, welcome to Keeping You Organized. If you are a perfectionist, this show is for you. And if you're not a perfectionist, we'll get close, okay? And that's okay because that's the way you are. But what is all this fuss about perfectionism? Well, we're going to talk about that today as it relates to organizing. And we're going to bring on Janine Adams from peaceofmindorganizing.com, right, Janine?
That's right.
And you're also a professional organizer and a podcast host. Tell us a little bit about this podcast you do.
Sure. So I co-host a podcast with Shannon Wilkinson, who is a life coach in Portland, Oregon. And our podcast is called Getting to Good Enough. And it's all about overcoming perfectionism so you can do more of what you love. Okay. So I think about perfectionism all the time.
Well, that's great. Perfectionism is one of those things that I think people throw the term around a lot. But for the sake of today, when we're talking about, getting organized, what kind of perfectionism do you see out there? When you sit down with a client, how do you identify if they're a perfectionist or not?
Well, most of my clients are perfectionists, I think, because most of my clients, by definition, are folks who are having trouble getting organized, right? So they want to do it right. And if they don't know how to do it right, they don't do it. And then things sort of spiral out of control. So when I walk through a client's home for the first time, sometimes I'll see unfinished organizing projects or unstarted organizing projects. And lots of times I'll see a lot of clutter too. And I'll say to the client, I'm going to guess you're a perfectionist. Is that right? She'll say a few things like, she doesn't know where to put something, so she leaves it there. Or I didn't know how to do this, so that stuff is lying down over there. And I'll say, you're a perfectionist, right? And she usually looks really surprised and said, yes, how could you possibly tell that? It's such a mess here. And I said, well, most of my clients are perfectionists, and this is not uncommon at all.
Well, it's really interesting. We did some market research on one of the products we came out with, and we found that when you thought it would be that it appealed to someone who felt totally disorganized, actually the product appealed more to someone who loved organizing a lot, or probably was more of a perfectionist. So, well, let's talk about what are some of the barriers in actually getting organized. We know that overwhelm is one. But how does perfectionism maybe keep you from getting started in getting organized?
Well, many perfectionists want to know the path. They want to know what they're doing. They want to make sure they're doing it right. And of course, with organizing, there's no one right way to do it. And so if they don't figure that they know how to start, or what the path is going to be from disorganized to organized, then they're paralyzed. It can be, perfectionism can be so paralyzing. And then they feel overwhelmed, right? It goes along with the feelings of overwhelm, I think, that many people deal with when they're trying to get organized. Folks feel like they need to know the right products to buy before they get started organizing. And I'm sure you talk to a lot of professional organizers, you know that buying organizing products at the beginning is rarely a good idea,
right,
until you know what you need. So that's one way it gets in the way of getting started. People want to over-research things a lot. And if they want to make sure they're doing it right, so they research like crazy and never actually do.
Now, I think about my wife. If she was going to have a professional organizer on, and she's kind of a perfectionist, maybe not totally, but she would want to have the house all cleaned up, picked up, and looking perfect. So when the organizer would walk in, it's like, well, why did you even call me? Do you run into any of that where people are like, I can't get together today because I got to get my house clean?
Oh, sure. On my website, I say, please do not clean up for me, because where things are piled up provide valuable clues for me to figure out how they live. But yes, people will say, I had to clean up for you, or please don't come this week. I couldn't get organized before you got here. And, I tidy up for my house cleaner, but I don't clean for my house cleaner, but I put stuff away.
Right.
I get that inclination. But usually, that by the time they're calling me in, they're ready enough for help that they actually let me in, regardless of how it might look.
So when you start with someone who's a perfectionist, are the steps maybe a little bit different than someone who's just kind of, disoriented, full of clutter and all that kind of thing? How would you, or how do you present the organization project to them?
Well, I think working with perfectionists isn't much different in terms of getting started, because what they're wanting, they've hired a professional, so the comfort levels there. If I know what I'm talking about, they'll think they're doing it right. So getting started with isn't any different, I don't think, with perfectionists. But finishing, it might be, because what the finish line looks like for a perfectionist might be different from someone who's willing to settle for good enough. And I encourage my clients, I encourage everybody to try to let go of the idea of perfection, particularly when it comes to organizing, because it's impossible.
Right.
It's a moving target. So I will, throughout a relationship with a client, advise letting go of perfectionism and living in good enough, which is what I do. I'm naturally good at good enough, so I don't actually suffer from perfectionism. But I think many perfectionists don't feel like they're suffering. But I feel that if they can let go of some that they will benefit. So that's usually by the time we're finishing a project, the client's heard that enough that they can actually call it done.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to the beginning. Like on a typical organizing project, what might be the first thing that you do, or the first step? When you've met with them, you've said, okay, I kind of understand you're a perfectionist. What might be the first thing you try to tackle?
Well, the very first step is always to create a vision for their space. So I know what the goal is, so that we can keep referring back to the goal throughout the process. So once that's done, then typically the next step is to create a plan, how to get from point A to point B. And in my particular business, it involves bringing in a team of organizers to sort and take clients through the decision-making process. So knowing their goal and then maybe modifying their goal if it feels impossible because of their perfectionism is the first line of attack.
Yeah. Let's talk about what their goals might be. What are some unrealistic goals that a perfectionist might put on you, or say, well, here's my goal, and do you have to maybe say, well, that might be too much, let's get to good enough? Do you have any examples of something like that?
Well, a couple pop to mind. If a client has 5 small children and her goal is to have everything put away every night so that when she wakes up, all she has to do is dress the kids and walk out the door, probably not going to happen because there are too many moving parts in this scenario. So we might adjust the goal to something that's more realistic. Also, lots of my clients tend to want to, or their perfectionists tend to want to have their donations go to the exact right place. So the baby stuff goes to the crisis nursery, and the suits go to Just for Success, and so forth. But if they do that, there's a great chance none of it will get out the door. So I always encourage them to do one-stop donation, go to a place like Salvation Army or Goodwill that will take everything, and then trust that it will get in the hands of the right people. And letting go of perfectionism about donations is really helpful.
Great. Well, listen, we're going to take a quick break here. And when we come back, I want to talk about more after you've done a few pieces of the project and we have to come up with that maintenance schedule, because I know that's probably a challenge for perfectionists as well. So we are with Janine Adams talking about overcoming perfectionism in organizing, and we'll be right back. Get organized now at myorganize.life. Need to turn those piles into files? We've got you covered. Hundreds of organizing products in a dazzling array of colors and sizes. There's an organizing solution for you. Shop online and they're delivered right to your office. Get organized now. Go to myorganize.life. That's myorganize.life. Get organized now at myorganize.life. We're back now on Keeping You Organized, talking about overcoming perfectionism in organizing. And this is a subject that our guest, Janine Adams from It's peaceofmindorganizing.com. She also is a co-host of a podcast on perfectionism and overcoming it, or getting to good enough is the name. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit, Janine. But before the break, we kind of talked about getting started. So let's say we've moved through a few of these steps. We've decided where the donations are going. At some point, we're going to have to talk about how this system works after you're done working with them, or in many cases, you just keep working with a perfectionist, or how do you set them up for success in the future?
Right. Well, we try to create systems that work with the way they think. And really, I truly believe that the foundation to doing that is letting go of excess. So if we've worked with a client to the point where the excess is gone, then we can more easily set up systems that allow them to put things away and to stay organized. We can come back and help people maintain it. And for some clients, we do that. But most clients, we can set up systems, simple systems that allow them to keep it going. And if it's simple, then there are fewer moving parts and less to get perfectionistic about.
Let's talk about do you have an example of what some of those systems might look, maybe a line item or two from them, or something that would illustrate how a system would work like that?
So I think a lot of folks tend to think that good organizing systems have many steps and are complicated. But what we try to do is, store things near where they use them. So have a hook or a basket that you drop your keys in when you walk in the door, so that they're there when you walk out the door, rather than having it be inside a cupboard door that's across the room from where you walk in the door. That would be an example. With mail, encouraging clients to let go of any junk mail or credit card offers or whatever before they get a chance to even put it down. That's a system. That's a habit that can be created that can cut way down on the paper mess that happens. And then having a place to put the stuff that you need to keep, and a habit of going through it in once a week or once a day or whatever that client needs for the way they live and the way they think. But it doesn't have to be a complicated system or an incredibly beautiful Pinterest storage basket with a vinyl label for it to work. Because sometimes if you want that gets in the way of actually doing it.
Right. Now, I would imagine that maybe a characteristic of some perfectionists is that they kind of know how it's supposed to be done, right? Do you ever run into these kind of conflicts where your client's kind of telling you kind of the way it should be, or does that not happen?
I guess I'm sure it happens. It doesn't happen a lot, I don't think. But usually they want the expert help, so they're usually quite open to our suggestions. And what I love is, though, if I make a suggestion that doesn't resonate with them and they then tell me why, then we come up with something else that does resonate with them. But I love to let go of the word should. I mean, there's no should in organizing, because we're all so different. So the best organizing system, of course, is the one that works for you. So what we try to do is come up with those for the individual client.
All right. Well, let's just talk again about if someone feels they're a perfectionist, and is what are some of the triggers that are going to tell them, what, I might need some help?
Help with their perfectionism, or help getting organized?
Well, help getting organized.
So if they feel paralyzed about getting organized because they don't know how to do it, and they feel like they really need to do it right, that would be a big trigger. Okay. But when it comes to perfectionism in general, if it's the same sort of deal, folks can't get started or feel like they're not making progress because they're hung up on perfect, which has got to feel very frustrating. Right. That's another trigger, that maybe think about settling for good enough, and think about those things that require closer to perfection and those things that really aren't important and can just be good enough.
Okay. Well, before we go, I want to talk first about your podcast, because you have a podcast that we've been referring to here. Tell us a little bit about that, and if there's a special website or where they can go and find it. And then also let's talk about your organizing services. what kind of services you offer, and do you do virtual or is it just in a local area? And give out your website.
Thanks. Well, the podcast is called Getting to Good Enough, and we have a website, gettingtogoodenough.com, which has all the episodes on it. You can also subscribe via iTunes or Google Play or Stitcher, and have it just show up in your phone. It comes out every Thursday, and we're just working on episode 26 right now. So it's only been around a couple of months, well, since June.
Nice. And
we're having a great time with it. It's a very informal audio podcast, and I think it's really helpful. People say they enjoy it.
Great. And how about your organizing services? We didn't ask you where you're located and what kind of services that you provide.
Sure. I'm in St. Louis, Missouri, and I work locally. I don't do virtual organizing. I do sell some guides that I've written on my website for people who don't live in St. Louis, but I lead organizing teams. We work in a residential environment and help people get organized in their homes, typically big projects. We just finished a whole house, for example, yesterday. And we have a very good time doing it with it. We make organizing fun.
Right. Okay. And the website is A Peace of Mind or just Peace of Mind Organizing.
Peace of Mind is PEACE of Mind Organizing.com.
Awesome. Great. Well, that's good. And you're isn't St. Louis, Missouri? Isn't Missouri the Show Me state?
Yes.
Yeah.
We are the Show Me state.
Show me how to get organized. I think that's a good one.
That's right. So, we show them the results. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Janine, thanks so much. This was your first time on our show. I'm sure we'll have you back again. And hopefully folks will take this advice. And if you're a perfectionist, evaluate that. Get the tips on getting started. I mean, it sounds like getting started and getting finished, folks. That's what you need to do. And then if you're really a perfectionist, you'll come back next time on keeping you organized.